Welcome to Conversations with Hinds County District Attorney Candidates, hosted by the Players Coalition. Thank you all for coming. The Players Coalition is an independent 501c3, 501c4 organization that works with professional athletes, coaches, and team owners that are dedicated to improving social justice and racial equality in the communities. The Players Coalition is focused on three key pillars: police and community relations, criminal justice reform, and education and economic advancement. And recognizing the important role that district attorneys play with these three pillars, the Players Coalition hosts these kinds of events across the country. They've hosted DA forums in New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, California, and now we're here in Hinds County discussing the race for the Hinds County DA for the 7th District. So hosting for the Players Coalition, we have Demario Davis and Adalius Thomas. Demario is a linebacker with the New Orleans Saints. He's a member of the Players Coalition Task Force, and I think most importantly is a native Mississippian from Brandon, Mississippi. And we have Adalius, who played college ball at Southern Mississippi before going on to be an all-pro Super Bowl winning linebacker with the Baltimore Ravens and the New England Patriots. And he has been retired since 2009. So I'll pass it on to them.
Thank you. As you heard, we're the Player Coalition focus on the attention of prosecutors and race because we feel the prosecutor is the most important act of the justice system. They have almost total power in deciding how things are charged, whether it's crime, what to charge, what not to charge, and the sentence to ask for. More than anything, they're responsible for what criminal justice looks like in the jurisdiction. Most importantly, from their perspective, how it treats society, the vulnerable population, particularly low-income communities, people of color, the power of prosecutors and the role that they play have created a current system of incarceration is why so many across the country have started paying so much attention to the DA. The race and why it's so important in discussions like this in order to see what kind of system candidates want to create instead of the one that is going on right now. We'll begin with a brief opening statement, followed by a question and answer session of the panel. And we'll take questions from the audience when we conclude with the final closing statement from the candidate.
So, first of all, Mr. Jody, I just want to say thank you for being here. There's no way that we can praise that enough, the importance of having you here and what it means for the constituents to be able to hear from you, hear your stances. So we just applaud you on being here. Just so everyone knows, all three candidates were invited and had ample opportunity to be able to be here. And Jody is here, and we still gonna leave space for time if they do decide to walk in, because it is important for the constituents to be able to hear where they stand on this election, as this election gets ready to approach on August the 6th. The way we'll do this, as he said, we're going to start with opening statements, and because you are the only one, it would have been 90 seconds per, but you have as much time. You have as much time to speak as freely. Like I told you earlier, I'm like, man, you like LeBron, man, it's your night. You couldn't ask for a better opportunity.
All right.
And so we're going to start with your opening statement, then we'll get to panel questions. And then audience, there's some note cards on the back. If you're going to have time for questions from you guys, just fill out a question, and halfway through, they're going to come up and take those cards if you have any, and we'll be sure to ask those. Were you saying something, bro?
No, I was going to tell them about the cards in the back.
Oh, yeah. Yes. And so we'll give it over to you.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for being here, and thank the Players Coalition for using this platform to educate and to inspire individuals to learn more about the criminal justice system and where we are and where we need to go. My name is Jody Owens, and I'm running for District Attorney of Hinds County. And I'm running because we have a broken criminal justice system in Hinds County. In Mississippi, we incarcerate the third largest number of people in the world. In Hinds County, we have a violent crime problem. Yet, We have a system that doesn't work for victims or defendants of crime. I'm running as a reformer on smart justice. I'm running because we have to stop using our criminal justice system for issues like addiction and mental health. I'm running because we all deserve to be safe in our home, and we can't break the cycle of crime until we look deeper into the problems and decide we've gotten it wrong and we have to get it right. I'm running because I believe the criminal justice system must work for everyone, despite your income, despite your race. It must be fair and it must be just. And on August 6th, I'm hoping for your support. And over the next hour, I will discuss my issues. We're disappointed that other candidates decided not to come. We think that voters deserve the right to hear our ideals and platforms besides just signs and one-liners. So we ask that you listen. We ask that you ask the tough questions and make sure that you know the candidate you can trust on August 6th to lead Hinds County into a just and more prosperous future. Thank you.
All right, well done. All right, y'all have already touched on what has motivated you to run the DA, but I'd like to spend a little more time digging into what you see as the role of a prosecutor. Across the country, we see the DA candidates promising to reform the system, shrink the jail population. This is obviously different from what prosecutors have been asking for in the past few decades. But polls show bipartisan support the reform of it, so including here in Mississippi. So I'd like to start by asking, what is the role of a prosecutor, and how should a prosecutor best fill that role?
So the role of a prosecutor is to keep us safe. And to keep us safe involves a lot of different tools and ways to do it. Traditionally, prosecutors only kept us safe by thinking that we could prosecute everybody. But what we've learned in places like Mississippi and then Jackson is that by prosecuting everybody, we didn't get safer. Interesting enough, things got worse. So the role of a 21st century prosecutor is one who understands that we have to look at the collateral consequences of prosecution. Are we really made safer by incarcerating people, or should we use the alternatives to incarceration? Should we use looking at the impact of incarcerating people? So for example, if we incarcerate people, we take them out of their homes. We take fathers out of homes and brothers. Oftentimes we find that even after being in prison, that they're not better and our communities are not safer. So the role of a prosecutor is first to do justice and be ethical in doing so, but make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable in looking at, are we safer just by prosecuting people? So a prosecutor has to make sure that the justice system is working, that people's rights are not abused, that individuals know that they will have a fair shot in their day in court, that the evidence will be presented to their attorneys, but also for victims. A prosecutor has to take into account that the victims are their clients. They got to make sure that they're making individuals whole and the victim needs are met. One of the things that's different and unique about our candidacy is that we're focusing on a model of restorative justice. And what that includes is making sure that victim and survivor rights are first. Oftentimes, prosecutors think they speak for victims, but victims have a voice and should be heard about what they would like to happen in cases.
Take this one. What should the goal of incarceration, what should the goal be of incarceration? Is there a point where incarcerating, I think you answered a little bit, is making them likely to offend when they might not have otherwise? Why or why not?
Well, the goal of incarceration should be two things: public safety, protection from harm, and rehabilitation. Those two things together. And the prosecutor has to decide and determine what length of time for a sentence, what individuals are charged with, that will establish both public safety, but also rehabilitation, so individuals can re-enter into society.
Okay. I heard you mention, I'm gonna slide in right there. You keep talking about the importance of district attorney's job being, public safety, keeping us safe. And traditionally, what we've seen is, lock all the criminals up, and we'll be safer. But I heard you say, well, we thought it was going to make us better, it's making us worse. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, if you look at things like the war on drugs, the crack epidemic, by taking all these individuals out of homes and destroying communities, we didn't get safer. In fact, it didn't stop crimes from occurring. More crimes occurred. So we have to acknowledge and be honest as a society that we got that wrong. If you look at things like mandatory minimums, they did not decreased crime that was occurring in the same jurisdictions. And you guys are not from here in Jackson, Mississippi, but right now we're on pace to have 100 murders this year. We've had 54 thus far. It's the highest number we've had ever. So we know we're not doing something right if crime is continuing to incur. Hence, we have to look at what we're doing and what's wrong with what we're doing.
I heard you say rehabilitation. What would be your plan for rehabilitation? Because we see a lot of times you see guys go in for something that's minor, but they struggle when they get back out on the street and can't get a job for these things. Do you have something in place where you can have a cleaner record after you do your time and clean your record up so that they can't hold that over your head? So speak a little bit more about rehabilitation.
One of the things that we've decided to do in our platform of Smart Justice is create what's called a collateral consequences unit. And what that includes is looking at what individuals are charged with and how it will affect her or his life after their incarceration period. For example, there are crimes in Mississippi where you're incarcerated where you can never vote again. And we know when individuals can't vote after serving their time, we've created a class system, a second-class system where individuals have no worth. We also know that there are offenses that can never be expunged. And we know if individuals can't expunge their offenses, particularly nonviolent offenses, that they can't be employed, they can't live certain places, they can't join the military. So we're looking at all the impacts of incarceration, and one of the most important things a prosecutor can do is determine what individuals are charged with and how they can reclaim their life once they've paid their debt to society.
Want to go to the
Ready
next?
to transition to me?
Yep.
Okay. So a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about what you talked about, like the war on drugs and how drugs are affecting our system. You even mentioned that Mississippi has the third highest incarceration rate. We know that drug charges and admissions make up a third of those people that are in our state facilities. I think I kind of know where you're going to lean up, but can you talk even more about really what's wrong with those numbers and why is it so, and how prosecutions are helping or hurting our communities?
Well, one of the problems we have currently in Hinds County is we have a significant shortage of law enforcement officers. So the two primarily law enforcement officers are the Jackson Police Department and the Hinds County Sheriff's Office. Both are functioning at less than 30% of the staff they need to keep us safe. I think far too often we focused on the insignificant crimes, and all crime is important, but we have to make sure we're focusing on the things that are really terrorizing our communities, the armed robberies, the burglaries, the murders, the rapes, things of that nature when we use resources. When we look at things like small level marijuana possession, and we see that the evolving science is legalization. Even in the nation's capital, it's legal. And we have to ask ourselves, are we getting safer by prosecuting people for recreational use of marijuana? And I would think the answer is no. We see far too often that we have individuals, and it's a very complex problem just for this, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit about this. In places like Jackson, when an individual is arrested on a small amount of marijuana, they may have a $20,000 bail, right? And to get out on a $20,000 bail, you have to pay 10%, which is $2,000. So a lot of individuals can't come up with that $2,000. So not only are we charging them for something that's legal in other parts of this country, but we also are charging them and punishing them for being poor or not being able to get bail. So that individual is losing his or her apartment, their car, their job, and what happens is that when we take these things from individuals, we're increasing the likelihood that they will find themselves more in the criminal element. We have to be smart about who we prosecute and why. And when we have so little resources, we have to make sure we're focused on the things that are most important for our community, and that doesn't make us safer. In fact, that makes us less safe.
Thank you. And we've seen across the country reform-minded prosecutors are pledging not to prosecute certain drugs. Are there any drugs that you are pledging not to prosecute? Why or why not? Or is this even an appropriate approach to prosecuting?
Yeah, I think recreational use of certain scale drugs should not be prosecuted before we focus on violent crimes. Now, as the next district attorney, what I would do is work with law enforcement officers to determine what that looks like and what scale to use. They know best. I have a lot of family and friends who are in law enforcement, but they tell me that that is not causing the harm to our communities. Now, there's a different when we talk about trafficking drugs or selling drugs to kids or schools or things of that nature, but recreational use is not going to be a priority of our administration.
Yes, and still stand on this topic of drugs. We are even seeing some prosecutors move towards understanding this as a criminal charge, as more than it's more of an addiction. And I think you even mentioned something along those lines earlier when we talked. And so if it's an addiction, then instead of criminal charge, it needs treatment. And so maybe we can look at alternatives to sending them, incarcerating them. What is your plan towards expanding treatment options as alternatives?
So it's one of our big pushes on the Smart Justice platform is drug courts. We can no longer criminalize addiction. So many crimes occur because of addiction, and we have to stop criminalizing it and treating it as a criminal issue because people don't get better in jail. They get better when we give them the services, whether it be mental health, wraparound services, things of that nature. And that's what I've seen in my career as a civil rights lawyer. We continue to criminalize things because it's cheaper or more convenient. But now we've gotten to a point, particularly in Hinds County, in our jail, where we have overcrowding, we have riots, all because we have individuals there that shouldn't be there because they're creating criminal issues, but because of addiction. So our focus is going to be looking at the alternatives for not just the addiction issues, but also our veterans, our homelessness. What we're creating is what we're calling a special victims unit, kind of a platform. And this platform will focus on domestic violence. It will focus on sex crimes. It will focus on issues that are not just criminal issues, but encompasses all those life issues we see too often.
Tell me, you talked about alternatives to that. Tell me what it would be some of your alternatives to cash bail.
Well, cash bail is a deeper conversation that unfortunately has really created a debtor's prison in places like Mississippi. But I think that first and foremost, we have to look at ways to ask ourselves, are we safer by incarcerating people? And not just because we're mad at them, not just because we're angry at them, but if we're not safer by incarcerating them, that doesn't help us. In a state like Mississippi with so many issues on revenue, in a county like Hinds County, we're losing millions of dollars focusing on incarcerating people currently in our jail system. So we want to use the pretrial diversion programs. We want to look at the community service programs. We want to look at whatever programs would give individuals second chances, particularly for things that are nonviolent offenses. I think second chances and rehabilitation is so important for our kids. One of the things I worked on as a civil rights lawyer for the last decade is understanding the evolving science of adolescent brain development. And what that means is that kids' brains develop so differently than adults. Anybody who has kids or was a kid knows you do stupid things as a kid. That's part of being a kid. And the science supports now that your brain is still developing until you're 25 years old. So I think we have to look at, in particular, how we're prosecuting kids, because once we force kids to touch the system, they are forever linked to the system, and we're starting them behind the line before they even get started. And that's important for a prosecutor to focus on. We're not going to be safe until we realize we have to stop the cycle of incarceration, because we have these individuals who, once they touch that system, they can never get out. And that doesn't make us safer. So as the next district attorney of Hinds County, we're going to be smart and tough and make sure we look at why we're throwing away kids year after year after year and wondering why the system is just full of individuals.
And I agree. It's very important for everybody to understand that the system is what's broken. It's not necessarily, not to discredit, anybody who's committing criminal acts or pretty much giving them a pass, but at one time we even talked, you saw during the year, people were making mentions of, let's get these people pardoned. Well, I can pardon 100 people, but if the system broken, 10,000 going right back in. And so that's what we need to make sure that we understand, that we fix these broken cycles that exist. And you did make a statement about cash bail is a much longer conversation. We're going to get to that. But I'll transition over to Brother Davis on sentencing.
All right. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit now about sentencing. You can't talk about incarceration numbers in Mississippi without talking about the state sentencing laws. In 2015, the average person sent to jail spent 38% longer in prison than the average person that was jailed in 2005. 16% of the people currently incarcerated are serving sentences longer than 30 years. The state's harsh three-strike laws, which we mentioned a little earlier, can result in a wildly disproportionate sentences, as we saw recently in Madison County, which is a little north of here, where LeVar Williams received 235 years for a nonviolent drug-related charge. 235 years. I'd like to start by asking whether their harsh sentences are fair and effective in keeping us safe. Why or why not?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If you're asking me what's the difference between a 10-year and a 20-year sentence when it comes to rehabilitating someone, I would tell you nothing. That's been my experience, that unfortunately in Mississippi, we have a problem with justice by geography. For the same offense in one county, you can get double the time in another county. And what we saw too often is that this is disproportionately impacted on socioeconomic status, meaning that if you were poor and you didn't have a private attorney, you would be incarcerated more time. And we don't believe that makes us safer. In many ways, we believe that's more of a problem. As the managing attorney at the Southern Poverty Law Center, one of the things that I'm very proud that we did is we started the Three Strikes Project. Because we realized the way Three Strikes works is that there's no limit on the time of 3 strikes. So for example, you can get 2 of those strikes at the same time. Say a 40-year-old man does 2 things at one time, he gets 2 strikes, and he did something at 18. 10, 20 years apart, he has now 3 strikes. So he has this double sentence regardless of when it occurred. Again, it's an example of the broken criminal justice system that we have that was purposely punitive as an extension of many things from Jim Crow and servitude and slavery. 3 strikes doesn't make us safer, particularly for nonviolent offenses. Individuals getting out of prison 235 months later doesn't make sense to me. And in fact, one of the reasons that we're running for district attorney is because Hinds County is the most populous county in the state of Mississippi, has the most people. And currently, Mississippi Department of Corrections budget is $430 million. Now, for those of us who live in Mississippi, you know we don't have that type of money to waste on incarceration. That money should go toward education and making better infrastructure where we can attract more employees and have a better state. But incarcerating all our people doesn't make us safe, it makes us worse. That's why we're not for mandatory minimums, particularly for nonviolent offenses, but we think we have to look at how mandatory minimums have been applied to the criminal justice system consistently and disproportionately.
Okay. In that, as a follow-up a little bit, is when you go and look at those sentences, will you look at the people that are already been sentenced to look at how you reduce that from, I guess, immediately or more rapidly than, looking at the people that are coming in? What about the people that are already in there that are serving like double sentences that, like you said, that did something at 18 and then turned around and got something that was a possession charge of recreational use when they're 35, and now they're doing, 8 years for something that really should just been a citation and I'm going by my way?
Yeah, the way we would handle that is that if defense attorneys chose to file what's called a motion to modify sentencing, we'd work with them in evaluating was the charge appropriately. It's easy for us to stop the crisis by dealing with who's going in there. It didn't happen overnight. It won't be fixed overnight, but we're going to focus on the ones in front of us first and make sure we have some system of proportionality there. But if individuals chose to file those things, we certainly want to be a transparent district attorney's office, one that focuses on realizing that we've gotten it wrong, and in doing so, we've ruined a lot of lives disproportionately. And I think that the current Hinds County Judiciary appreciates that. So if individuals file those type of motions, we certainly would look at them to make sure it was proportionally on what we were doing currently. For example, for the last decade, we've been working on sentencing reform with organizations like Pew Organization and Ford, and the code section looks very different than it did 20 and 30 years ago. I was appointed to task force by the governor of the state of Mississippi to help rewrite the existing laws. And we're very proud of that work because we realized that it was antiquated. It didn't keep up with the changing in times. 30 years ago, you didn't have cyber crimes. You didn't have so many crimes. You didn't have texting crimes, things like that. So if you don't have the right laws on the books, you're limited what you have, which is why, as the next district attorney, we're going to work on policy as much as prosecution. We think we have to keep up with the evolving changing of the law. 30 and 40 years ago, you didn't have Facebook and Instagram. And people are committing crimes on social media now. So we have to make sure we're innovative and we're not being stale, but we're changing with the evolving science of technology and also criminology. Both of those things have to be applied to how we fix things.
Okay. Prosecutors, they decide whether to charge offenses or let defendants plead guilty to charges that would trigger harsh sentences. Why is that not something is that something that you would consider in making decisions? Because sometimes you see all the time, they plead and they're pleading to something that is harsher than it should be.
Yeah, I think that's one of the true unfairness with the criminal justice system, the intimidation of the power of the prosecutor. What you charge somebody with is the difference between them going home in 1 year or 20 years. And oftentimes, the way you stack charges is the intimidation factor of ruining somebody's life. We're not going to intimidate people into pleading. Even me, if I was given the choice of 20 years or 2 years, whether I did it or not, I would probably take the 2 years just so I can go home and see my kids in 2 years. We're not going to intimidate people into pleading. I think that's the wrong mentality, and I think that's abuse of power. I think individuals should have their fair knowledge of not getting crime stacked, but also the police system needs to be fair. A lot of times people will plead because it's easier than going to trial and they want to go home. If you were in the Hinds County Jail right now where gang banging is occurring on a daily basis and individuals are getting beat and maimed, you just want to get out of there. And you're told in the plea you can get out. Well, that's just not right. It's not fair because what's not appreciated in real time is that you just accepted a felony that you may not have to accept. You just gave away your right to vote permanently. You just gave away your right to live in this community. So many things that I just think are not fair. We need a system that's just and fair, and that's why we're running to be the next district attorney.
All right, we're going to transition over to bail, and you can take it over, Demario.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking on sentencing reform. We know that is very much needed, and especially speaking to the pressure that the prosecutors put on suspects when it comes to taking plea deals. So thank you for speaking to that. So we're going to transition to what we were discussing earlier, this cash bail and pretrial detention. Very much a problem throughout, not just in Mississippi, but throughout the country. We've seen reforms happening, and so now there are a lot of models out there of people who are moving away from the cash bail system. But I think just understanding the landscape of this issue, you could speak to it more, but currently there are 12,000 people incarcerated in Mississippi. 56% of them are awaiting trial, meaning they have not been convicted as guilty, and they're just simply there. A large part of them are there on cash bonds. So they're there because they're poor, not because they're guilty. And we know through data that those people can be in jail for 7 months up to a year time awaiting trial. And so in this time, these people lose jobs, they lose housing, which kind of puts them back into a cycle that they will likely commit a crime if they haven't committed a crime, and if they have, they're going to commit it again. And so, and also in keeping these people there, the government is spending $90 million to detain these people. And so do you think that the pretrial detention system that I just described is a problem? And why or why not?
Absolutely. I think the pretrial system in Mississippi has traditionally been used not only to create a debtor's prison system, but to punish poor people for being poor. And in itself, people have to understand the purpose of the pretrial system and bond and cash bail. Cash bail traditionally is in place for two reasons: for flight risk and public safety, for individuals who would do us harm, that we're worried about individuals for domestic violence issues, or we think there's an actual threat. But what has evolved in Mississippi over the last few years is a $46 million bond and bail issue, using those terms interchangeably, bond and bail, where individuals with that $20,000 amount I mentioned to you can't get out. And it's important to understand when we talk about 12,000 people, Mississippi currently has approximately 32,000 in MDLC's custody in prison, but we're talking about jail. We're talking about people who have not been convicted but can't get out because they can't pay bond because they would either don't have the money, They need to save the money to pay for a lawyer, or they can't come up with the money. And we've seen so many people extorted through the bond system, forced to have sex with bondsmen, forced to give up their house and land in ways that were just punishing them. And the fact that we didn't realize that for years is really terrifying. Very recently, there was an article about this in the Marshall Report. I really encourage the listeners to read it. I think it was written by Joe Neff. And it spoke to years there was no limitations in Mississippi on how many bonds you could write on an individual. You already have administrative fees in there. So regardless if you did a violent crime or nonviolent crime, you were still paying the same administrative fees. But currently, you have to file your bonds with the Commission of Insurance for Mississippi, and that just started. But that's so impactful because we were punishing people who didn't have money. And that's not what the criminal justice system is for. And in fact, we're a better society than that. No one chooses to be poor. And the good book is pretty clear on this. The poor will always be amongst us. But we can't punish individuals for being poor, and that's what our bail system has traditionally done. That's why on misdemeanors, we're not going to have any cash bail whatsoever for injured individuals, and we also will never have bail without first making a determination, one, if there's a risk of flight or public safety, but two, a determination to pay. If you know, for instance, homeless people are getting a bail that they can't pay, well, they're already homeless. What type of sense does that make in society? That's why when we educate people on the broken system, you can't tell me having a homeless individual in jail for some period of time, for 9 months or 2 years like it's happening in Hinds County, when they're already homeless, the thought that they could pay a bail, a bond, is prosperous.
Yeah, so can you elaborate a little bit more on that, what you were just speaking on of you wanted to be no cash bail on misdemeanors at all. Also, I think you kind of hinted at it. What would be your criteria for, if there is one, for a pretrial detention?
First and foremost, we're always making a determination whether individuals are a threat to the community. If individuals have a history of violence, have made threats to individuals, or through working with law enforcement, the determination is made that there's a safety risk. Well, that's a reason to have bond, and that's the purpose of having it. But what the studies have shown, and the data is very clear on this, is that bond doesn't make you more likely to show up at court. That's a misnomer. What we've seen throughout the country is that people, when bond has been waived and bail has been waived, people are still actually showing up at larger rates than with the bond. People would tell you historically, well, the bond makes you show up, well, it doesn't. What makes you show up is the reminders, just like you get from your doctor's visit or your dental visit, the text messages, and then no individuals can come to court. It's not the bond that makes you show up more.
Does the system, does Jackson, Hinds County have that in place where they have the text messages that go out?
I don't believe the notification systems are in place. Very recently, through the change of the rules, Rule 4 of the Rules of Criminal Procedure in Mississippi, it was changed where misdemeanors would not have the same cash bond effect, but we also have to look at what felonies should not have them as well, because there are tons of felonies on the books that are nonviolent offenses. And the way people use the nonviolent offenses and the violent offenses that are actually not violent, the term violent, still is disproportionately affecting poor people.
And we know counties across the country that have gone to no cash bail systems. What do you think are the pluses to those and potentially minuses?
Well, I think the pluses are, one, individuals are still at home, still being productive citizens, still providing the stability that individuals provide when they're home. When you take individuals out of a home, there's a huge void there. Whether it be economic, whether it be social, that way. So we want individuals at home going to work being productive citizens. We don't want individuals in jail unless they have to be in jail. That's the whole purpose of a fair-minded prosecutor. I think the concern always is we don't want to release an individual who has a propensity for violence that might commit a more heinous act while they're out. But that's a concern that I think there are tons of tests out there that we can use and determine about what a threat assessment looks like. It's what we use in prisons and jails now about determining classification systems. You know, everybody's seen the movies in prison. You see somebody wearing green stripes or red stripes. Well, those stripes are about classifications and the harm and the way that they behave. And then we can make that determination when they're in prison. We certainly can make that same determination when they're in society, because the goal is to stop the cycle of mass incarceration. We shouldn't just push people in because it's the easiest thing to do. And the only way we do that is we go back to being tough and smart. And the smart element is looking at the threat assessment.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking to pretrial detention and cash bail. Just making a intermission statement. We talked about having cards in the back for people asking questions. What we're going to do once we get to the bottom of these other 2 points, we're going to just pass the mic around. So if you have a question that you want to ask Mr. Jody, be ready to ask. Go ahead and get your question in mind. And by the way, give yourselves a round of applause. Get a crowd, give yourselves a round of applause. Do not believe the myth that there is not power in voting. People have the power. You have the power, and being a knowledgeable voter here, it just says a lot about you. And so we appreciate you guys being here. So we're going to transition our brother Adalius over to police.
Policing is the next subject we'll talk about. I'd like to ask a few questions about policing. Policing reform is a major issue around the country, and Mississippi is no different, as there have been multiple recent allegations of police assaults and misconduct. Because police and prosecutors work so closely, what role of a DA in responding to allegations of police misconduct, and what, if anything, will you do as a DA to make sure that the police are accountable to the community and not abusing their power?
Well, I think it's no one person can fix the broken criminal justice system by themselves, and we have to be clear about that. The district attorney's office can only work with the judges that are elected, the sheriff, and the police force. And I have a brother-in-law who's a retired Jackson police officer, Ricky Purvis, for 30 years. So we have a lot of appreciation for what law enforcement do and how dangerous their job is. But that being said, no one's above the law. And we have to be very clear about that, not lawyers, not judges, and not policemen. One of the things we have to focus on is improving the perception that communities don't need police and won't police. And I think that's one of the focal things that we'll do by working more closely with them as they police. No one wants to be over-policed, but we certainly know that when we're in trouble, we want police presence. When it comes to police misconduct, they have to be under a certain microscope because they have a duty of public trust, which in our administration, we'll make sure that we investigate any allegations of police misconduct with the same vigor that we would investigate anything if we thought there was a independent investigation needed. We certainly would call upon the local officials, the Bureau of Investigation in Mississippi, to do so if we thought that we were compromised in our ability to do the investigation. But I think you build trust by first having everybody judged by the same standards, and second, by ensuring that you're transparent about those investigations. And there are some things you just can't release overnight. Investigations have to be thorough. You know, I've been in the United States Navy as a Navy officer for 7 years. Investigations take time. I understand that. But at the same time, when investigations are complete, we have to own up into our mistakes as law enforcement officials, as district attorneys, as individuals involved in the system. And when we improve the transparency with the system, we'll improve individuals' trust of the system.
Do you think that that is a difficult to balance, needing the police to investigate and prosecute your cases and working to hold them accountable as well? What will you do to make sure you strike that balance?
Well, I think you have to be fair, and I think you have to be honest. When we're elected, one of the first things we're going to do is meet with all the law enforcement, to the extent we can, call a meeting and look at a new vision for safety in Hinds County. But most importantly, we're going to ask them, how can we better support you in doing your job? Currently, we're asking a lot of police. We're asking for them to over-police schools. We're asking them to be mental health individuals when it comes to crises. I mentioned earlier that they're understaffed. We're asking them to be heroes and sheroes in effect that they can't even do their job. And most importantly, we have to acknowledge that we're underpaying them for a very dangerous job every day of their lives. Individuals leave home not knowing if they're going to come back home. A random stop, and we see that far too often. So we have to let them know they have an ally in the district attorney's office, but not someone who's going to hide conduct that's inappropriate. We can't fix the system unless we're clean. And we have to be open about that cleanliness, and that's how we're going to strike that balance, by letting them know we're there with them, but also we're going to hold them accountable just like they need to hold us accountable. One of the things that we want to do is make sure that we embed a district attorney in the police force or in the sheriff's office to ensure that investigations are complete. We don't want to get a case at trial and realize that we don't have the evidence necessary for conviction because we didn't appropriately investigate the case. They need to feel like they're comfortable with working with the lawyers in the DA's office, and that's one of the ways that we're going to focus on rebuilding trust.
I do thank you for speaking to the balance of, understanding that it works on both sides for the police and the people that they are protecting. Can you speak more to the police accountability? Have we seen a lot of the issues that have plagued our country with some kids being, killed, unarmed people being killed, and then there being lack of accountability? And what we've seen as the Players Coalition, as we get ready to roll out our policing campaign in the future this season, what we've seen is a lot of times district attorneys are getting pressured by police unions to not be tough on the police officers. And that has, in some cases, been a reason why they haven't been prosecuted. Can you speak to, if you know anything, or how you feel particularly about in the ways that prosecutors probably previously have been pressured to not be as tough on certain situations as they needed to be?
Well, I think over the last 3 years, we've had 4 police-related shootings that took the life of individuals in Jackson, which is the capital here in Hinds County. I think there are several factors and things we must do to ensure we have public trust. I think the evolving science show that body cams work. Body cams are helpful in identifying both for victims and also for police officers to ensure that they have the cover they need. We're a strong supporter of those and making sure they have the resources to be successful there. We also are a strong supporter of making sure that they are governed with the same level of independence. If a police shooting occurred, like all instances, I think that grand juries can determine with transparency whether or not crimes were committed. I think that, we have to be clear about that. Everybody goes through the same process. But at the same time, I think you factor that in with the danger of the job. We know of individuals, and I believe that at least see several law enforcement individuals here currently. We know that we ask them to do the impossible. So I think you support it, but also you're honest about they have to govern themselves with integrity. And for the large part, I do think that majority of law enforcement officers do that. I think they want to get it right. They're trying to get it right. And unfortunately, when we have those bad apples, that's what makes the media. But they have to feel supported and empowered, but also know the bad apples will face the same wrath from a district attorney's office as any other defendant.
I think that one of the things that me personally, I've seen it, and you're so, I agree with you with, they have a tough job to do. And for me, when I look and I see, one of the main things you see is stop resisting, stop resisting. My shoulder flexibility to put my arms behind my back is very limited. So if you take my hand and you stick it up past the middle of my back, that's a natural reaction for it to, resist coming back down. It's just my body isn't meant to go there. And so that's one of the things that, I don't know if that's training or whatever it is, that's one of the things that I see so often now on TV, whether you're in New York or Pennsylvania. Every time, as soon as somebody get on someone, the first word they say is stop resisting, to something like a CYA of stop resisting. Well, sir, my arm does not belong up by my ear, behind my head. So, you're causing a scenario and then crying a victim of stop resisting. So when you see that, to me, it really bothers me when you see someone use that because they know the body cam is on and their defense is where they're resisting. You have them in an arm lock for 45 seconds. What training do you have where you can't put a handcuff on someone and solve that issue? But for me, I like to tell the story without color. To then, that way you can judge the act. Remove color from it and say, subject A was doing this, and subject B. Don't say who's the officer. Don't say if it's an officer. Tell the story without color. And then get a true judge of the act. And then you don't have that, well, he only did it because you don't know what color he was. So you can tell the story without color, to me, then allows you to judge the act. And you can use subject A, you can use subject B. That would be, to me, one of the things that I would love to see in a grand jury, so that they can't then use prejudice to give preference to color and race. I feel that grand jury shouldn't have that information. They should have subject A, did subject B, X, Y, and Z, and then you get a true reaction to the act, not your demographic, not your religion, not your tax bracket, not where you live, any of that stuff. It makes you judge the act itself without any kind of predetermined justice.
One of the things that I think is important that you hit on is education. We believe in education, and we think that education is important to being a safe county. A few years ago, I did a Know Your Rights training for Colin Kaepernick in New Orleans, and he's been doing these throughout the country. We helped him put one on in Florida as well. And Colin felt very strongly about educating individuals in school about how to interact with police, how to be appropriate, what things were important, because we know the rules at places about moving your hands too fast, right? People say keep your hands on the steering wheel. Why don't you stop me, officer? I think we have to train both sides. I think we have to go to our schools and make sure we train our kids to know how to be respectful of law enforcement. We often tell people at the same time. I see my friend Juan Court back there. He's running for sheriff. We were on the panel together, and we once told somebody, after 12 o'clock at night, it's not the time to be having a philosophical conversation with police about why I was stopped, right? Most people get that,
Correct.
right? Because everybody wants to go home. But at the same time, we have to train officers how to deal with very normal things. Because someone has their pants sagging or because they have dreads, this doesn't make them differently. You shouldn't look at them differently. Oftentimes, we see people on those same reports that you're referencing, write down male black suspect, 235 pounds, 6'4", and so it creates the ideology that he's intimidating already. And I think we have to take the intimidation out of how we look at individuals and understand that we're all just people, and we all have a job to do. And as long as we continue to focus on educating our communities, the district attorney has 20 employees. All our district attorneys will have an obligation to be in somebody's classroom every year to ensure that we're educating people and kids. We're not in conflict. We shouldn't be in conflict, but we've allowed society to tell us we're in conflict. And if we're holding each other accountable, there is no conflict. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate you speaking on that. And we did want to get to reentry, but just for time purposes, I know there's some very important questions that's going to come from the floor regarding reentry, as that's a very vital part of the system. We talked about the role the prosecutor plays as far as people going to jail and how long they stay there, but then they got to come back into society. And that's a very important part that hopefully some questions from the floor get to that. I'm pretty sure I know one. So we're gonna pass the microphone around for any questions that you guys have from the floor, and we're gonna try to get to all of them. But we're gonna get as many as we can. Thank you.
Start with you, man.
I have a question. When it comes to trying cases, if there's an appearance of a conflict of interest, a judge will recuse themselves or whatever. What is the stance when it comes to a DA or a prosecutor? Sometimes they even move cases to another county if there's appearance of a conflict in an unfair trial. How does that play out for a district attorney and a prosecutor?
Well, I think the district attorney has the same obligation to not prosecute someone that they know personally or have a relationship with. But we're happy about our candidacy. While we have been a criminal defense attorney and I have been a special prosecutor, both in Hinds County, I don't have those conflicts. I've not had this litany of clients we've represented that create conflicts for us, so we're prepared to go in and prosecute as many cases as possible. But ethically and morally, you should not prosecute a case where you have a relationship with that individual where anyone can look back and say they got a different outcome because of who you were or who they were to you.
More questions?
That's your hand.
While we got a little quietness, I'd like to represent or acknowledge former teammate Gerald Mumford in the back, Southern Miss, Mr. Red over there, Southern Miss alumni, great guys. Both of them part of the justice system. Mr. Mumford is judge, and part of law enforcement, Mr. Red, who took care of me when I was in school and made sure his wife cooked good and made sure I ate good. So I appreciate you guys coming out. My brother in the back, Ramos, over in the back. That's my brother over there. So just acknowledgement so we had a little time.
All right.
And on that point, just want to acknowledge about Mr. Mumford. Gerald is the county attorney in Hinds County, elected official, and the county attorneys play a critical role in the larger criminal justice system as well, because they deal with a lot of initial arraignments, and the district attorney has to be willing to work and side with that office. And I'm happy to have reached out to him through this campaign as well. So just want to acknowledge that.
Appreciate it.
So first, I want to thank the players for hosting this, and thank you, Jody, for agreeing to be in the hot seat. It's not an easy task for you tonight, so I want to recognize that. Jody, you kind of alluded in one of the questions to the over-policing in schools, and so I wanted to give you an opportunity to elaborate on that a little bit. We know that for many of the incarcerated men and women, their introduction to the criminal justice system is through a code infraction in school that used to be handled by school counselors, and now they're being handled by police officers for various reasons we won't go into right now. How would you work with police departments and schools in Hinds County to stem the flow of young people being introduced to the criminal justice system so early and then becoming more likely to be incarcerated later on in life?
Thank you for that question. I'm proud that my parents are in the audience tonight, and they're both retired educators of 30 years. I just want to acknowledge them right there in the corner. And the reason that's important is a fairly embarrassing story. I don't remember what grade, but I do remember I got to fighting, and I was suspended from school for 3 days, and boy, the suspension was nothing like what happened at home. But what I would say about it is that I didn't find myself in jail, and today kids are finding themselves behind bars for school fights. And one of the reasons that we talked about the adolescent brain development as kids is that we don't expect kids to know how to deal with conflict. You know, eventually somebody's going to say, yo, mom, and then we fight, right? That's all it kind of takes. But what's important to know is that when we're putting kids behind secure detention, which is happening now, we're inviting them to first touch that system. And you think that's helpful, but it's not. What we saw historically in this country is that when mass shootings occurred, whether it be Columbine or even here in Pearl with Luke Woodham, there was a natural overcorrection. And the way I describe it to people as a civil rights lawyer is that if you're riding down the road and you're late at night and you're getting sleepy and you hit that rumble strip, everybody know what it feels like. Well, you pull the car back, right? And people don't know tons of people have accidents because they pull too hard. Well, we saw these mass shootings. What happened is that we saw more and more officers in schools, particularly schools of color. It was an industry push, some say led by the private prison industry and others, to over-police our schools. So what happened is that while those officers were there to supposedly make our schools safer, what would occur is that they dealt with discipline issues from a criminal approach. So kids start finding themselves in police cars, or you see police cars at schools, and we know the data is clear. Kids are safest when they're at school, proportionally. And while we all want to avoid mass shootings, we know that putting police in schools don't necessarily make schools safer. So when we talk about the term of officers in school or student resource officers, we have to ensure that they're trained to deal with conflict and not just arrest kids while they're there. Because when we start over-policing kids, we create something that's very passionate to me that I've been working on for almost a decade, which is a school-to-prison pipeline. And the school-to-prison pipeline is a system that we're pushing kids out of school, giving them less, and ensuring that they will find themselves in the juvenile system. Now, people don't think the juvenile system is inherently bad, but it increases the likelihood that a kid will fall behind in school, particularly in Mississippi. They won't graduate on time if they graduate at all. They will drop out of school, and then they're more than likely to find themselves in the adult prison system. So if we know that, we want to keep kids in school, because if we keep kids in school, we're safest. And that's why we need a district attorney who has a reformer's heart that understands that when kids are in school, they're more likely to graduate and be gainfully employed. So that's why that's a focal point for us, and that's why we think that the over-policing of school is a bad thing. There's certainly reasons individuals have to be incarcerated in school, but a school fight, talking back to a teacher, those are not one of them. And the teachers of back when, in my parents' day, they dealt with most of those things in the classroom. But I think we have to empower our teachers and the law enforcement officers who are at school to realize their goal is to keep kids in school.
Yes.
Okay, the question is, how does the increase of mass incarceration offset data and representation as it relates to the U.S. Census?
Well, yeah, I think that's such a powerful question, and you really hit on why mass incarceration is a civil rights issue. For those individuals who didn't hear the question, how does the mass incarceration impact the U.S. Census? Individuals know we're doing a census now. We know people count. Simple, people count. There's 50,000 individuals in Mississippi right now who cannot vote because they were incarcerated at one point in time in their life. That's ridiculous. Mississippi will look totally different, and we saw what happened when individuals can disenfranchise the right to vote. The people who don't know if they can vote, the people who are currently incarcerated, if they're not counted in the census, Mississippi loses representation, and if we lose representation, we lose the ability to impact our state. So this is not only a crisis from a public safety issue, it's also a crisis from an economic issue. We cannot be the state we need to be unless we're getting representation that way, and that's one of the reasons that we're running, because we have to stop that from happening. People have to understand that we're not better as a state when we continue to incarcerate people just for silly things. Thank you for that question.
Shouldn't all cases have priority? I mean, if you a public offender and you assign a case, shouldn't they all have priority?
Is that the rest of the question?
Pardon me?
Is that all of the question?
Well, you know, sometimes as a chaplain, I visit the prison, and sometimes the inmate is just sitting behind bars. You know, sometimes pretty close to a year, waiting to go to trial. And then the word I get is that the appointed attorney has a backlog. Should that backlog affect the inmate that's sitting behind bars?
Yes, sir. I'm following your question, and thank you. That's an excellent question. That's one of the reasons I think that our candidacy makes the most sense for district attorney. You know, so for the last decade, I've been managing an office and managing 20 people and managing a multi-million-dollar budget. And what's important for a district attorney to do is to appreciate how to be effective with the resources that you have. And I think that just like running our household, determining what bills you're going to pay and when, you know you have to pay your rent or your mortgage. You need shelter, right? You know you have to get to work, so you have to deal with your car note. Well, as your next district attorney, all cases have priority, and all cases have the right to a speedy trial. That's a constitutional right. As a civil rights lawyer, I feel very strongly about. As it pertains to the backlog and the systems that we have to fix, I think we first have to focus on what we've gotten wrong and fix that. It's a huge problem in front of us right now. It's a huge problem to determine who to prosecute and what, and how to get the backlog, but also ensure that the county is safe. I think there's some things we can do immediately and some things that will take time. But one of the things we're going to do as your next district attorney is that we're going to look and track the length of time individuals have been incarcerated in jail and what the delay is. And we're going to make sure that information is publicly ready to the public and transparent to both the victim and the defendant or his or her family. We think we owe that to the public to ensure that if there is a delay, they know why. For example, in Mississippi, you might be aware that currently we have a backlog with the state crime lab. And you can't prosecute a case, particularly the more heinous cases, unless the evidence is there, whether it be a rape kit or DNA analysis. Currently, as I understand it from talking to the current district attorney just last week, that we're bringing someone in from Texas, a pathologist, to look at that. So we don't have a state pathologist in the county. Cases deserve priority, but some of those things outside of our control One of the things that we're most interested in is being innovative on seeing what we can do to move that docket. When I talked to Congressman Thompson about these issues in the county, he told me that we're not asking for enough federal dollars in Hinds County to fix those issues. That's one of the things that we're going to make sure we're doing, realizing that we have limited resources, but we have to do everything we can to get the resources. In my past life as a civil rights lawyer leading the Southern Private Law Center, we raised millions of dollars from nonprofits, from federal government, from grants, identifying where those shortfalls were, and that's what we're going to do. But I'm glad you brought that question up because everything deserves the same priority, but there are some delays based on the system, and we acknowledge that. Yes, sir.
But if that doesn't happen, isn't that a violation of their civil rights?
I think that certainly civil rights are violated. I've represented individuals who I thought civil rights were violated based on the length of time of incarceration. I think one of the things that we do as lawyers is we have to be open and we have an obligation to notify the court and the other side what the delay is and let the court make the determination. And that's, you know, unfortunately, as my wife often tells me about this position, and I love her guidance, is that we're trying to make perfect an imperfect system. We got to be honest about that. The criminal justice system in itself, right or wrong, is imperfect. You know, we're not helping individuals the way we'd hope to. The idea that they're going to get better behind bars in the cage is the size of a parking lot is a fallacy. But we can make this system as perfect as it can be, however imperfect it might be, if we're committed to looking at what's wrong with it and every day coming with new ideas and talking and including people like yourself, chaplains. I think the faith community has a huge component here in evaluating where an individual is. You're in front of Reverend Watson, one of our big supporters, and I think that he knows all too well that when we don't put faith and involve the clergy into these problems, we don't have enough solutions.
And I would just, follow up with that. I mean, that's a very, very good question. And understanding and dealing with this across the country, the right to speedy trial is a problem across the country. Every area, from Boston to Philadelphia to Seattle to New York. When I was in New York and New Orleans, we're dealing with speedy trial. And technically, a misdemeanor is supposed to be addressed within 90 days. A felony is supposed to be addressed within 180 days. And yes, backlogs do exist, but the prosecutors, the DA, he plays an important role. He can prolong that because that's how people are staying in jail 9-10 months without ever coming to trial. So they may go in because of cash bail, but they stay in jail because they don't have a speedy trial. You know, and so they play a big role in that. And so that question that you ask is very important for him to address, and I think he addressed it in a very fair manner, and that's very true. I can pretty much back up what he said, but that's the importance of the other candidates being here to be able to answer that question, because it's not a perfect system, but the DA plays a big part in correcting the system that is in place. And so you want to have a DA that's going to use it, because they can use that backlog as much as they want. It's backed up. That's why we ain't have it. And they can use extensions and continuances and just keep pushing it back. They know how to use the system. So you want to have a district attorney. It's very important to have a district attorney who's going to address them issues and have the integrity not to use that, understanding this victim's on the other side, and not to use it to his advantage just to get it working in his favor, because they'll continue it, and then what they'll end up doing is come in with a plea deal and be like, man, you want to stay here or do you want to go to court? And so that's a good question.
We got one here.
Okay, Attorney Owens, I'm going to assume that one of the reasons why you decided to run, and perhaps the other candidates as well, is the unethical, perhaps at best, illegal, perhaps at worst, extra-legal activities inside the DA's office. If that is the case, I'm wondering, could you articulate for us some of those things you have identified already that you want to walk in an office to immediately address? Because all of these other questions are continuing upon that office operating, given the broad connections with the judges, with of course the prosecutors, the public defenders, and the like. So can you articulate for us those things you want to address in the office to end the kinds of practices that we have been apprised of, at least in the last 3 years?
I might ask you to elaborate on those specific practices if I don't address them. But I will tell you that the most important thing to me is to have a high ethical standard of how we treat individuals and what we do under the rule of law. And I think that everybody, regardless of who they are and where they live and what they look like, have to have the same justice system for us to have the integrity that we choose to govern with. I think one of the most important things that district attorneys have to do in ADAs is make sure that we're not withholding evidence, exploratory evidence that can lead to the defense deserves to have their day in court. And we don't have to hide evidence when it comes to convicting somebody. I think if they committed the crime and we support the police officers on their investigation, that's sufficient. I also think that no particular zip code, even the zip code where I'm from, has more access than anyone else when it comes to that. One of the things that we want to make sure we do as the next district attorney is have a day that's designated for victims of crimes and also for defendants or their families to come and talk to the ADAs about what has occurred and things that may not be known. It's been my experience in investigating things throughout the world, really, is that somebody knows something. And we have to encourage people to be honest and be open about what they know, because everyone wants a safer community. If I didn't address what you were asking, please elaborate. Thank you.
Thank you. So my biggest thing, as I've been hearing everyone speak, I think it's important to have these talks. But for myself, the question that I have is, I'm an educator, and I'm an educator in Hinds County. And I'm only 25, but I've been educating for 3 years. And what I've noticed is, what can I do, or what can we do to help that process as far as the children that are younger learning what just the system looks like. What does it entail as far as where they are, who they are, because a lot of times for myself, I've had students in my classroom who have been convicted. And when they come back from youth court, one of the biggest questions that they have, or they tell me is, well, I wouldn't have, had I known or had I been educated on the situation, I would have moved totally differently. So what can we do to educate that will make your process, or whomever it is, easier, and it alleviates, the middleman in the aspect of what's going on, because I believe that's huge.
Thank you for your question. I think it's a great question, and thank you for your service in the classroom. I think that the things we've identified to date fall into two buckets. Bucket one is the alternative schools and the expulsions. I spoke a little about that earlier. When kids are moved to alternative schools in Mississippi, they're moved to a classroom or a system where they get less. But we essentially have acknowledged, because they couldn't be productive in the classroom, that they need more. So in alternative schools in Mississippi, there's no sports, no band, no music, so many things that would help individuals. And what I found is that alternative schools is that last stop where individuals can't get out. I think, one, we have to do everything that I mentioned earlier to keep kids in school, or one, to strengthen the alternative schools to get them back on the right track. The second thing I think is that you're just as much as a frontline defender as anybody else, because you see the problem when it happens. You know all too often, as I know, I have 2 kids in JPS, that so many kids are getting their only 2 meals of a day at school. We know that I think there's approximately 2,000 to 3,000 kids who are homeless in the classroom. They're moved around, they don't have a steady address, they're moved around. These are real problems that plague our community, but they're not just unique to us. We have to make sure we're identifying those risk factors and putting the things in place that can help individuals. When you're coming from a situation where you're getting physically or sexually abused, you should run away. You should find some help. But in Hinds County and Jackson, we don't have a shelter for those kids. That's why, unfortunately, we see so many currently young girls missing, being sex trafficked and all those issues, because we can't get to them fast enough, and you're not giving the resources or training to be empowered in that. So I think what we have to do on our transition team, and which we will do, I'm making this note right now, is we're going to put educators on our transition team. When people think about the criminal justice problem or criminal justice solutions, they think we just can get all law enforcement in the room and what do? Lock people up. No, we need people like you who want to be involved, who can help us identify what we can do. And one of the things we'll do in that note is that we'll identify how we see those problems occurring and what we can do. I know we haven't got to reentry yet, but one of the things I feel very strongly about as a prosecutor, the job is to do justice. The job is to do justice. And what that means is that when people have served their time, what are we doing when they come back into society? I've seen way too many men and women that come back. I was on the way here, and the guy said, I just got out. I can't get the driver's license. He saw my magnet on the car, and he says, can you just help me with something? Well, we shouldn't make it so difficult for people to come back into society. We have to give them driver's license. We have to help them get Social Security cards. We have to help them find stable places to live. If they get a medication in prison that's helped them to be not whatever condition they may have, we have to do something to help them get that same medication. If not, the cycle doesn't stop. So we're going to be proactive in all these things. I imagine we're going to be pretty tired too. But I think that we have to put these things in place if we're going to stop the cycle of mass incarceration, particularly in Mississippi. And only then can we see a better Mississippi and the better Jackson. Because if an individual gets out, and to your point, one of the things that I've acknowledged that we want to work really hard on is the stigma that comes with incarcerated parents, the kids of them. When your parents are incarcerated, there's a stronger likelihood that you will find yourself incarcerated as well. People don't understand why. Well, one, because one parent's not there, and that's harder for you. You might be raised by a grandparent or somebody else. But secondly, you're not getting the academic services you might need help on. You know, I'll look at my kid's homework tonight, but if I'm in jail, I can't do that. You're not getting the social services when my kid is bullied at school or is in the fight to say, look, man, it's okay, we're gonna get through this. You know, you need a stable home environment, and you're seeing when that's not happening. So one of the things we're gonna do that we think is unique and somewhat progressive on these issues is we're gonna track the kids of people who come through Hinds County that found themselves in our system. There will be something that you fill out to acknowledge I have these kids here, all right? And this is where they're in school. And whatever you can do to provide something more for them will help them. We're gonna do that. But in addition, far too many individuals are going into jail or prison, and they have to for committing certain crimes, and they're on child support. And while they're in prison or jail, they can't pay the child support. So when they get out, the first job they get the immediate lien on their check. So they're de-incentivized to actually work their job because the child support has been so much they can never pay it off. Because they're already paying off the fines and fees associated with parole or probation that we also have to deal with at some point in time. So we're going to look at all those issues. Now, I'm sorry, what's your name? Drake Sen. Will you make sure you contact our campaign tomorrow? I'd love for you to be part of our team. We need individuals who are thinking about these issues that we always don't see. Thank you.
To piggyback on that a little bit, I've dealt with schools a lot, and one of the problems you have is a disconnect between teachers and students, because all teachers aren't like you. Because school is about structure, but when they leave school, I have structural rules for unstructured environment that don't apply. So how do I take these structured rules and apply them in an unstructured environment? You can't do it. So you're talking about critical thinking skills that your kids now lack. And I'm talking about millennials, period. They have the lack of thinking for themselves. So they've been taught what to think and not how to think. And that's one of the things that we have as a cultural thing, is that we have to make our kids more accountable as they grow up to make them figure out some things on their own. Not just when it's in a critical situation. When they come asking you for stuff at home, think about that. You can figure that out without asking me that. Teaching them how to think, not what to think. Because the structural rules of go tell a teacher does not work after 4:30. You can't go tell a teacher after 4:30. You got a drug dealer on the corner. I haven't ate since yesterday. What structure is that? Lunch lady ain't there with the hairnet. She's not there. So that is real issues that you got to deal with as a teacher, that it does not come in a syllabus, does not come with anything. It comes with empathy. It comes with respect. It comes with understanding. It comes with a loving care for kids, which most educators have. But if you don't understand that there's a disconnect, that when I'm done at 4:30, I'm going home. And I don't care if you get home or not. That is the disconnect that you have with some of the educators, and the kids then, they don't care about me. That's why you see kids gravitate to usually one or two teachers in the school, and they respect their teacher because their teacher may hold them accountable. Because most kids like structure. Most kids like structure. They may fight it in the beginning, but once they get it and understand it, they like it. Which goes back to the whole thing of putting them in jail early. it gets them used to it. Oh, it's just jail. I've been here all the time. At least I get to eat. So those are some of the things. So when you talk about that structure, and it's the empathy of you and more teachers like you, hopefully, that have that empathy and want to get involved, to ask them, hey, Stanley, how's everything at home? That small thing may mean nothing to you, but the fact that he had to take care of his sister because his mom was on crack before he came to school, he has a right to have attitude. But if you don't have the time or the care or the love to say, you acting kind of strange, and you know his background, he should be cut a little slack. Because at 12, you shouldn't have to deal with that. So that's my $1.37.
And just to piggyback that, I've done work at Oakley, and I've done work at all the detention centers in Mississippi, and so many people don't realize they've seen the movie The Wire. The Wire, the sitcom.
Yes.
Not sitcom, it's the greatest one of all time.
It's real.
Yeah, it's real. But people don't realize when mothers are telling young men that you need to go make some money for the family, your options are very limited, and you have to do something to come home and bring some money home. And people don't realize that's a real thing that's happening. And over the life of this campaign, we have real poverty in Jackson. And people need to embrace it. This is a nice place. It's a great museum, but there's so many kids who've never seen this museum, who don't ever leave their communities. And until we start being honest about, what our communities look like, and how there's two communities, as they used to say, it's different sides of the tracks, we can't really address the issues of individuals and the families. And you have to touch these kids before you can teach them. And that's so important.
Good evening. My question is, what are your plans to hold adults more accountable for violent attacks and crimes that they've committed against children?
Against children? Mm-hmm. So any crime against children will go into what we're calling and the name might change, but it's a special victims unit. And that encompasses elder abuse and children abuse. I think those cases are particularly despicable when it comes to the impact on children, whether it be sexual abuse or physical abuse or any type of abuse. And that would be a priority for our office. That's why we are creating a separate unit for that, because I think we have to let the society know that those who prey on our children will not be tolerated in this society, not in this Hinds County, not in our administration. And as progressives as we are on those issues, that will stop on those issues.
We've got time for a couple more here.
One over here.
Hello. So as a realtor, I work closely with people who no longer feel safe in Jackson, homeowners that want to leave Jackson, or future homeowners who don't want to even consider Jackson to stay for the sake of their families. What can you as a district attorney do to change this shift of people leaving Jackson?
Thank you. I think that one of the things that the district attorney's office can do is make sure that property crimes are treated with a priority. I explain to people quite often that when an individual is willing to break into your home, not knowing what's on the other side of that door, you got to be real bold or real on something. And that's why we continue to highlight the addiction issues, because oftentimes the property crimes that contribute to lower property values and the stigma of Jackson's unsafe, albeit the reality, is based on the individuals not realizing that people are often breaking into homes to feed an addiction or feeding a high. So if we want to look at that, we're properly targeting the drug component. When people go into a house, we know how it looks. They're grabbing TVs, they're grabbing PlayStations or iPads, right? Grabbing something they can sell, and we generally find those things at somebody's pawn shop because they want the quick cash. That's why the general individuals who do it. So we have to first target on the addiction issue, making sure that we're getting people the services, because what we found is that oftentimes it's the same group of individuals, they're breaking into the same group of homes, they're traveling around doing it. So we have to prosecute those appropriately and making sure that's stopping. But also I think it's important that we really embrace our communities and all they have to offer. I think that a lot of people have chosen to stay in Jackson. It's one of the reasons that we're running, because we believe, God bless you, we believe in having a safe and prosperous Hinds County. For example, I often tell people where we are right now, downtown Jackson, is one of the safest places you can be. People forget that often. They think, oh, Jackson's safe downtown? No crime downtown. You know, we have shelters that let out and people are asking for $1 because they're homeless. That's not crime. I think we have to own the narrative of what we've gotten wrong. We have to embrace what we've gotten right in places like this and those individuals who go other places around here. We can be proud of that. But certainly the addiction issue, I think, leads to a lot of property crime, but also prosecuting property crime. It's a serious crime. There are property offenses currently on the books that are treated as violent offenses even though nobody's home. So, you know, there's a distinction between somebody watching your home and watch you leave and then they go in it, but they really don't know who's there or not, right? I might have left and my wife might be there, but I might be gone. So we have to make sure we treat property crimes and home invasions as crimes against human dignity, because every individual deserves to feel safe in their own home. And that's what we want to make sure that we're doing and governing in a way that they will feel that way, and those who take that privilege away will be held accountable. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, sorry. I want to start this question off with a statement. Been dealing with a number of youth in this city of Jackson and around Mississippi, and also dealing with some ex-offenders that are trying to find their way in society these days. And the biggest thing that I keep getting back is a lot of young folks don't vote because of mistrust, not in the person, but into the position itself. Sometimes, I guess to use a football analysis, it looks like your team is playing against another team, and also the referees, where the police is the other team and the DA office is the referees. So how do we eliminate that gap or build that trust with our young people and the police department and the DA department, so that you will have that policeman in your community that you know and trust, that when you have those issues, you're able to say, hey, officer such and such, I got this going on. How do I address this without having to deal with it myself?
I'll go after you.
Well, I think that's one of the things that we often remind people, that the best form of ability is availability. You have to be available to the public to build trust. And that's one thing we've committed to do. Throughout this campaign, we've met so many individuals, and it's been kind of a rat race. But one of the things I realized that probably won't make my family happy is that I still have to be out there as a district attorney. I still have to make sure people know who we are, know what we stand for, and be visible, and give them opportunities to build and trust in that. And that's one of the things that we're committed to do. That's why earlier I mentioned the access to the office. I think we got to make sure that we're going in schools and providing the type of summer internships, the type of day at the office of a DA where individuals can learn about the system and trust the system. And I think when you include schools, you know, this school, this is your month. We want as many people to come through the courtroom, however it works, and know why this happens, where people will be encouraged to trust and believe that, you know what, I met the district attorney. You know, I met the ADAs. They seem like decent people. They seem approachable. And I think if we do that the right way, combined with our mentorship program that we feel very strongly about, that we can build trust where it's been lacking.
For me, I want to comment. I'm going to give you a big mama answer. Don't worry about what somebody else doing. Do what you're supposed to do. Because if you understand your history as a young kid, if you can Google what Lil Baby singing, if you can Google what Drake's song is, you should surely be able to Google your history and learn about it. So you Google your history about people that say, I don't vote because of this, you're just looking for an excuse. You can look for an excuse or you can look for a reason. One or the other. So if you want to talk about, okay, I'm never heard, well, you're not heard because you're not talking. You want to talk on Facebook. Talk at the poll. Facebook don't do any voting. If it was Facebook voting, listen, everybody vote. Everybody got to vote on Facebook and got a meme for it. But if you want to be a man or a woman or whatever it is that you want to be, then as your big mom say, don't worry about what somebody else doing, baby. You worry about the pick is in your own eye. You have to do what you have to do, because when you drive on the street, you going past a car, you don't think twice about that car coming into your lane. You don't know that person from a grain of paint. You don't even know nothing about them. You don't know what they had to drink. You don't have anything. What do you say? You better not come over here. Because you want them to stay in their lane. Because what? I'm staying in mine. Stay in your lane and vote. Do your research about your candidates. and go and vote. Don't sit there. Somebody that says, oh, I don't trust the system, so I'm not going to vote. It's just, you can dig deeper into that and say, look, if that's what you're looking for, you're just looking for an excuse not to vote. But that is not a reason not to vote, because if you look at your ancestors and the people that have died to vote, that should be enough reason within itself to go vote, not because I don't trust the system. There's a lot of people you don't trust that you speak to every day.
Wow. Well, one, I wanted to know, like when you go to a hospital emergency room, they triage you based on what your symptoms are. If you come in, you're having chest pains, you're immediately put to the top of the list. As the gentleman said, what is the priority when you have a case that, say, the laws of limitation have ended, and they come in with other people that have committed misdemeanors or felonies, but they're lumped in and they're sitting and waiting and don't even know what they're there for. So when a loved one calls to see why little Jamal is in jail because we don't know why he's in there, and you find out, oh, well, this case is, well, he won't be out until for another 30 days. What do you mean? The case is old. Don't you want him off of the books, or is it because there is big money in having prisoners, you know, in the system, but we as taxpayers, we're paying for them to be there, but when I call, I've got, you know, Quita on the other end, when did he get brought in? You know, there's a disconnect even with the employees. When I call you, you know, it's like going to McDonald's. I can't tell you how to make a burger. If I ask you, how do you make that Big Mac, you should know because you're representing McDonald's. So when I call to see why my child is in prison or why was he picked up, oh, well, you're going to have to call back tomorrow or call this person. And when you call that line, they don't speak to you. They say, well, if you're interested, if there's an active case right now, we can't speak to you. But this person just told me to call, you know, where they're going to put them on the docket to take them to court, but if it's active, we can't speak to you. But you can write a letter. So that's just going to perpetuate the fact that they're sitting in there, not knowing anything, and now they're calling home collect. That's more money. You know, it's almost like a conspiracy. Like, how is it that there isn't a disconnect? In all honesty, what is it that you can do? Because when I call, I want an answer where I'm going to get through, not somebody saying, well, I think. I don't need you to think when I'm calling you about my son's life or my daughter's life. I need for you to know they need to be held to task just like you're held to task. Even if I'm a janitor, you need to be the best janitor. So what will you do when we call in and not say, marque numero dos? I don't even know when that started, but when I call, I want them to speak to me in English and have some concrete answers for me, or take ownership. Maybe if we pay them more, they would care more. So we got people on the other end that are working in your office that is an extension of you. It's all a squeaky wheel. You know, and so it's kind of hard to get them to come and vote or to take any credence in what you have to say. We're like, oh, just somebody else jaw jack, and it's going to be the same thing. They know it's going to happen. So you got folks out here, these kids, they don't have anywhere to go, like you said, because it's history repeating itself. What is it that you're going to do to? Honestly, I think it's a big task that you're undertaking to take on this, because it's going to take you a good 6 months to a year probably to try to, you know, get certain things in place. But how is it that you're going to, what is it that you put in place to say, well, this case that's old, we need to go ahead and take, where's the priority? I guess is, you know, to come back full circle. Where's the priority with these cases? If it comes in, laws of limitation is over, but he's got to sit in jail for another 30 days, 60 days. For what? It's a waste of money and a waste of time. There needs to be some type of committees or something, you know, when these cases come in the system. This was back in 2014. Why is he even here? Let's take a look. It's nonviolent. Am I making sense? Yes. I know I'm kind of all over the place and trying to catch you while we can, but it seems like there's so many things that you need to address. You know, the person that answers the phone, that's the first point of contact. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm calling your office. So LaQuita, when she answers the phone with the attitude, it's like I'm speaking to you. You put her on the front lines. How do you vet these people, or, you know, make them want to be a part of a solution instead of the problem?
I think what you're discussing, and it's a fantastic question, is a culture shift, right? I think that it's important for people to feel, and this is the way we will govern, that it's not my office, it's not Jody Owens' office. It's the citizens of Hinds County's office. And in doing so, we have an obligation to make sure customer service, efficiency, professionalism are the hallmark of what we do. And we all have to be held to that same accountability. And we all can have a bad day. Lord knows I've had mine. But I do think that if we're honest about representing people and making sure we know who put us there, we'll always govern in the way that is efficient that way. There are systems in place. Currently, if you are arrested in Hinds County, you are on the website for Hinds County Sheriff's Office. When that system catches up with the DA's office, it's not as transparent as I like it to be. What we're committed to do is this. We're committed to have the most innovative system that exists where we know where somebody is at all time, what they're charged for, when their next date is. I think that's most importantly. People don't like uncertainty. When you're dealing with your loved one, you should have some level of certainty. So we'll know when the next date of hearing is, now I don't know, or we'll find that out immediately. And then we'll take our system and make sure we're working with the other branches of the judiciary and of the law enforcement communities to make sure they can do something similar. I think you're right. I hate antiquated systems. I hate stuff that doesn't work. I hate even phones that doesn't work, right? I mean, we need something that's just, it's easy to get the information, and we're committed to doing it. So I think that's what's unique about our candidate. We're old enough to have the right type of experience having led large teams, but we're young enough to still appreciate technology and how it makes our life easier, right? Nobody knows anybody's phone number anymore, right? It's all in our phone. So we have to maximize technology to be the most efficient system we can, and that citizens deserve that, and we're going to do that.
Well, I think that's all the questions that we're going to take for the evening. We would like to thank you guys for, more importantly, is being engaged, being here, voicing your concerns. I'd like to thank Mr. Owens for to coming here, sitting in the Budweiser hot seat, as they call it. As the coach used to tell me is, they had questions, and you better have answers, preferably good ones. So I really do appreciate the time. It's very important that we pay attention to who's running in the office and who we're electing as people who have so much authority in our society. Be sure to encourage everyone that you know to go out and register to vote in the primary scheduled for August 6th, 2019, which is, not too far away. And so I thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here and listen and be engaged and partake in such an important thing such as your kids' future and the society and your community for the short period of time. Demario.
And Ms. Jody, want to give you final comments of why everyone should elect you as the next DA.
Well, thank you so much for everyone who's here, particularly my family and friends who came to support this journey. I am Jody Owens, and I'm running for District Attorney of Hinds County. It's an open seat to fix our broken criminal justice system. The issues we talked about today are clear. The system is not working for any of us. It's not making us safer, and we're not being held accountable. And as your next district attorney, I'm making a commitment to you to be tough on crime, but to be smart, to fix the system of mass incarceration, and to make sure we can be the safest and most prosperous Hinds County we can be. We have 19 days left till we elect a new district attorney, and that individual will set the course for safety in Hinds County where we all live, play, eat, and visit. And I'm asking you to do your research, look at our backgrounds. I wish this could have been a dialogue between my opponents, but I hope you've heard me today and understand what type of leader I will be, someone that will be accountable to you, transparent to the public, and always focus on what is right and just. So again, thank you so much for listening to me, and God bless.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. As you are dismissed, make sure you encourage everyone to register to vote and vote in this primary on August the 6th. Thank you, guys, for your support. Be blessed.